Shu Kai never expected that a quiet evening in Tan Songyun's apartment would spiral into one of the most unforgettable nights of his life. What started as a simple visit between two friends, colleagues, and perhaps something more, turned into a story filled with secrets, confessions, and questions that still linger. Because hidden beneath her laughter, her warmth, and her delicate charm, Tan Songyun had been guarding something she never wanted Shu Kai to find. It wasn't a necklace, it wasn't an old photograph, and it wasn't even a private message. No, it was far more personal. It was a journal. And when Shu Kai stumbled upon it, everything between them changed. The evening had started out casually. They had finished a long day of filming, and Shu Kai, always the gentleman, had insisted on walking her home. Tan Songyun, tired but cheerful, let him in. She brewed him tea while humming softly to herself, and he couldn't help but watch her with that familiar look, half admiration, half something deeper he never dared to name. As she went into the kitchen, Shu Kai wandered absent-mindedly around her living room. His gaze landed on the shelf by the window. Books, some scripts, a few trinkets. But one item seemed out of place, a leather-bound notebook, tucked behind a stack of magazines. The edge of it was frayed, as though it had been opened and closed many times. Curiosity tugged at him. He told himself he was only glancing, but when he pulled it out and opened the first page, his breath caught in his throat. There, in neat handwriting, were Tan Songyun's words. Her thoughts. Her secrets. The first few pages were harmless enough, daily notes, reminders, little reflections about work. But then, the entries grew personal. Shu Kai froze when he saw his own name. She had written about him. Why does Shu Kai always wait for me after filming? He doesn't realize how much it affects me. He makes it impossible to hide my feelings. He flipped the page. Today, he laughed at something silly I said, and I swear my heart nearly burst. If only he knew, if only I were brave enough to tell him. Shu Kai's chest tightened. These weren't just casual musings. These were confessions, raw and unfiltered. Words she never intended him to see. And then came the darker entries. What if people find out? What if I lose everything I've worked for? He deserves someone fearless, someone who isn't afraid of the spotlight. Not me. Never me. Shu Kai swallowed hard. He had always suspected there was more beneath her quiet smiles, but reading these words, it felt like stepping into a forbidden room. Suddenly, Tan Songyun's voice called from the kitchen. Shu Kai, do you want sugar in your tea? He quickly shut the journal, sliding it halfway back onto the shelf. But his hands trembled, and when she returned, tray in hand, she noticed. Her eyes darted to the shelf. Her face drained of color. And in that instant, she knew. You didn't, she whispered, setting the tray down with shaking hands. Tell me you didn't read it. Shu Kai tried to speak, but the silence between them was louder than any words. She grabbed the journal, clutching it to her chest like a shield. For a moment, her usual warmth vanished, replaced by raw panic. That wasn't meant for you. Those were my private thoughts. The air in the room grew heavy. Shu Kai wanted to apologize, to explain that he hadn't meant to invade her privacy. But he also couldn't ignore the truth he had just uncovered. Songyun, he said softly, why didn't you tell me? Her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, almost angrily. Because it's easier to write it down than to say it out loud. Because once you know, everything changes. And I wasn't ready for that. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. But I already knew, Songyun. I just didn't have the courage to admit it either. She blinked at him, stunned. The tension between them was electric. It was as if the words in the journal had leapt off the page and wrapped themselves around them. Tan Songyun sat down, gripping the journal tightly. Do you understand what this means, Shu Kai? If anyone else ever saw this, if anyone ever found out, my career, your career, everything could fall apart. He knelt in front of her, his gaze unwavering. Let them talk. Let the world speculate. What matters is what's real. And what's real is right here. He reached for her hand, but she hesitated. For Tan Songyun, her journal wasn't just a diary, it was a record of her deepest vulnerabilities, fears, and unspoken desires. Sharing that with him was like stripping away every layer of protection she had carefully built. "Shu Kai," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you weren't supposed to see this side of me. I've always been the strong one, the cheerful one. But in those pages, I'm just a girl who's terrified of what loving you might cost." The confession hung in the air, trembling like a fragile thread that could snap at any second. And yet, instead of breaking, something unthinkable happened. Shu Kai leaned closer, his hand finally brushing against hers. "Then let me carry that fear with you. You don't have to hide anymore." Her eyes widened. For years, she had locked her feelings away in that journal, believing silence was safer than truth. But here he was, tearing down every wall she had built with nothing more than sincerity. For the first time in a long time, Tan Songyun let her guard down. She let the tears fall. She let him hold her hand. And for a brief, stolen moment, the world outside ceased to exist. But the story didn't end there. Because the journal contained more than just feelings about Shu Kai. It held secrets even deeper, memories of heartbreak, sacrifices she had made, and the truth about why she had always been so guarded. Shu Kai eventually asked, gently, "Songyun, was there someone else before me? Someone who hurt you?" She froze, flipping through the pages nervously. Then, with a trembling sigh, she nodded. "There was someone. Someone I trusted. And when I opened my heart to him, he betrayed it. After that, I promised myself I'd never let anyone see me that vulnerable again. The journal became the only place I could be honest." Shu Kai listened, his chest aching. Suddenly, her smiles, her hesitations, her fear of rumors, all of it made sense. "You're not her, Songyun," he said firmly. "You're not broken. And I'm not him. I'll prove it to you." That night, the journal became more than just a secret. It became a bridge. A fragile but unbreakable bond between them. Tan Songyun never wanted Shu Kai to read it because it exposed her deepest scars, the raw truth behind her carefully polished public image. But now that he had, there was no turning back. The hidden journal was no longer just hers, it was theirs. A story of fear, love, vulnerability, and the courage to face the truth together. And though the world outside would never know what truly unfolded in that quiet apartment, those pages held the start of something neither of them could have predicted. Because sometimes, the secrets we hide the most are the ones that end up saving us. The journal sat on the shelf, quiet and unassuming, like any other book. But Shu Kai's fingers lingered on its leather surface longer than they should have. Something about it called to him, not loudly, but insistently, like a whisper in the back of his mind. He told himself it was nothing, just curiosity. Yet the moment he cracked it open, he realized this wasn't an ordinary notebook. Inside, the first page carried her handwriting, elegant and precise, but hurried in some places as if the words had been pulled straight from her heart before she could stop herself. Shu Kai's pulse quickened. It felt wrong, almost invasive, to look. And yet, the pull was too strong. He began to read. Today was exhausting, but Shu Kai made it lighter. He doesn't even realize what his smile does to people. Especially me. The words hit him like a jolt. His name. His smile. And the weight of her confession, hidden within those simple sentences. He blinked, unsure if he was seeing it correctly. But curiosity pushed him further. The next page was dated a week later. "Sometimes I wish I could be braver. When he looks at me, it feels like he sees past everything I try to hide. I want to tell him, but what if saying it ruins everything?" Shu Kai's throat tightened. Every line was drenched in emotions she had buried deep beneath her cheerful facade. He could almost hear her voice, trembling as she wrote them. He turned another page, his hands shaking. "Rumors are dangerous. People already talk when we leave set together. If anyone knew how I really felt, it wouldn't just be my heart at risk, it would be my career, my reputation. And maybe even his." Shu Kai's stomach dropped. The fear in her words was palpable, and it wasn't just fear of rejection. It was fear of the world, of the spotlight that followed them, of everything they had both sacrificed to be where they were. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice the sound of footsteps until it was too late. "Shu Kai." Her voice rang softly from the kitchen. He froze, the the journal still open in his hands. Panic surged through him. He snapped it shut, his heartbeat racing like thunder in his ears. He shoved it halfway back onto the shelf, but his clumsy haste betrayed him, the edge stuck out awkwardly. She entered the room carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. Her smile faltered the instant she saw his face. Shu Kai's guilt was painted across his expression, and her gaze flicked instinctively to the shelf. The color drained from her cheeks. Her eyes locked onto the journal. "Tell me you didn't." Her voice was low, trembling, almost a plea. Silence stretched between them, so heavy it nearly suffocated him. Shu Kai opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hands shook as she set the tray down. The teacups rattled against the porcelain. She stepped forward, grabbed the journal, and clutched it tightly to her chest. Her usually calm demeanor was replaced by raw panic, like someone had just uncovered her deepest wound. "That wasn't meant for you," she whispered. "Those were my private thoughts." Shu Kai felt torn in two. On one hand, he wanted to apologize, to reassure her that he hadn't meant to pry. But on the other hand, he couldn't deny the truth he had read. The words had already branded themselves into his heart. "Songyun." His voice was hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Because it's easier to hide behind a smile than to risk everything. Because once you know, nothing will ever be the same again." Her hands gripped the journal so tightly her knuckles turned white. It was more than just paper and ink, it was her sanctuary, the only place where she allowed herself to be vulnerable. And now, the one person she had been writing about had shattered that boundary. Shu Kai took a tentative step closer. "I shouldn't have read it. I know. But Songyun, the words, they weren't just yours. They were mine too. Do you understand? I felt the same, I just..." Her head snapped up, eyes wide, shimmering with disbelief. "You what?" she whispered. He hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every possible future hung in the balance. "I've been afraid too," he admitted. "Afraid of what people would say, of how it would change everything. But reading this, it's like you wrote down the things I couldn't say out loud. You're not alone in this, Songyun. Not anymore." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath a battle between relief and fear. Finally, she shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "You weren't supposed to see this side of me. I didn't want you to know how weak I really am." Shu Kai's expression softened. He moved closer until he was only inches away. "Weak? Songyun, what I read wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen. To admit how you feel, even to yourself, that takes strength." Her defenses cracked. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back finally fell, streaming silently down her face. The room around them felt smaller, the air charged with something unspoken. Shu Kai lifted his hand slowly, giving her the chance to pull away. When she didn't, he gently brushed the tears from her cheek. Her breath hitched at the touch. The journal trembled in her grasp. "Shu Kai," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "if anyone ever found out, it could destroy us." He looked into her eyes, unwavering. "Then let them try. What matters is what's real. And what's real is right here, between us." She wanted to believe him. Oh, how desperately she wanted to believe. But the scars of her past, the weight of the industry, the endless gaze of the public, they all loomed over her like shadows. And yet, for the first time, she wasn't carrying it alone. The journal had been her secret, her hidden refuge. But now, as Shu Kai's hand remained on hers, she realized something shocking. Maybe she didn't have to hide anymore. The journal might have been discovered by accident, but its words had unlocked a truth neither of them could run from. A truth that was terrifying, dangerous, but undeniably beautiful. And as they stood there, hearts pounding in sync, both of them knew that life after this moment would never be the same. Because sometimes, the secrets we guard the most fiercely are the very ones that set us free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic and mind-blowing stories you won't want to miss.